Bored Ape, Beeple, CryptoPunk. If you have any idea what I'm talking about, you've been paying attention to the growing phenomenon of NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Some NFTs have been selling for staggering amounts of money. Pax the Merge sold for $91 million. Beeple's Every Day, the first 5,000 days, sold for $69 million. Everyone who I've told what I'm covering this week has no idea what's going on. And I'll admit that I fall into this category as well. Here to make sense of this are Ahmed Javaid, Associate Professor of Computer Science, and Ammon, Allred, Associate Professor of Philosophy, both here at the University of Toledo. Thank you both for joining us. Glad to have you here today.
Thank you.
So I want to start this interview with just a little bit of a disclaimer and say that I feel completely out of my depth when talking about this. I feel like it's such a confusing space, and that's why I thought it would make sense to have someone from philosophy here to talk about the idea of digital ownership, and someone from computer science to talk maybe about the mechanics of what NFTs are. So why don't we just start with that question? What are NFTs? What does it mean to be a non-fungible token and to own one?
So, if you just look at, the words, right, non-fungible and token, right? So fungible essentially means that it cannot be replaced or, cloned essentially. So there can only be one, right? And the other part is the token, right? And all of this actually correlates back to the underlying technology of cryptocurrency and blockchain, right? Those viewers, who are aware of cryptocurrency, they know that it's based on an encryption mechanism called blockchain, where, there's a community of, people who have, different computers, different nodes, and everyone is validating transactions, ledgers, and so on. And I believe there was a more in-depth discussion on this in one of the previous Rocket Talk episodes, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But these transactions essentially have tokens associated with them, and then these tokens are essentially non-fungible, so they cannot be cloned, they cannot be replaced, they are irreplaceable. So that's what is the underlying mechanism. Now, whenever a transaction takes place, when we are just exchanging bitcoins for dollars, right? So those will not be called as NFTs. But let's say I'm actually selling a digital asset, right? Some kind of art, some kind of GIF, and we have all these different kind of NFTs like music and so on. When I am actually buying this instead of the bitcoins which I have, a token will be generated in the backend using the blockchain. So that token will be the actual NFT which I will own. And not necessarily the data or the information which I'm actually buying, like the GIF or the picture, the video which I'm actually buying as an NFT. That will not be my personal property, but that token will be my personal property.
So kind of like a chain of ownership. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes, yeah, kind of.
Where does this token live? Like where?
So it usually lives on one of the computers over the internet, where all the transactions are being validated.
And the artist is the one usually who hands out this token? Or?
So artist is essentially selling the item, and the token is generated by all this network of nodes which are validating cryptocurrency transactions in the backend.
Okay. Well, a lot of the attention paid to NFTs have been really focused on the crazy prices that they've commanded. Why is it that people are paying millions of dollars for these NFTs?
That's a really good question. I think part of the answer is we don't know, and we won't necessarily know for a while. I think that there's at least a few factors that go into it. One has to do with the fact that NFTs right now are, I think, and you might know this better than me, but they're one of the few things that you can sort of buy natively in cryptocurrency. So one big question with crypto, we've seen these prices go crazy, right? So suddenly people who have invested much smaller amounts in crypto have what look like on paper giant fortunes. But one of the currencies is as good as what you can buy with it, and converting large sums out of it is hard. So I might have a lot of money, and I might want to be able to store it in different ways. And I think some people's thought, for a long time, it's been true, even of physical art, that physical art is a way to store value. So I think that the claim is that this is a way that one could store value, right? I think there's probably other things too. To be honest, I think that there's probably ways in which this is probably being used for money laundering. A lot of people are wondering, at least in certain instances, because when you can move digital assets around, you can make it harder to trace the ownership. There have definitely been documented instances where an artist has been inflating their own price. So if I sell to myself, which you can't always tell on blockchain, I can make it look like I've sold something for $1 million. I haven't really, right? I've sort of moved it around between one place and another. Now somebody else is going to come along and buy my next piece for $700,000, let's say, or 1.3 million. We know that's happened in some instances. I don't think we know how much, so because of the way that these work. So I think the answer is that there's probably multiple answers to that question, and until somebody people have gotten in and really traced out where these things are going, we might not never ever know the answer to that. But probably a few reasons.
I mean, what is the valuation process of figuring out what an NFT is worth? Has anyone really looked at why one NFT sells for millions of dollars and another one doesn't? Or is that the same as asking why a Monet sells for millions of dollars, and if I were to draw a smiley face, it wouldn't sell for millions of dollars?
I mean, yeah, I think it's a little, I mean, to a certain degree, the answer is it'll sell for what anyone wants to sell it for, right? Which is kind of a boring answer, but I think important in this context. So these are all done, at least my understanding, by auction, right? So I put it out on an auction, and people can buy what they want. Again, so you sort of have to look at who's buying these. It's mostly people who have made a lot of, or at least have ostensibly made a lot of money in crypto. So they've got big amounts of drawn. I don't know and so that's going to sort of factor into what an auction looks like. Beyond that, I mean, so how does a Monet get valued? That's a great question. I think there's two things to keep in mind there. One is that, when we look at the history of art, we talk about the value that Monet played in that. That's very different than the price that Monet fetches on the market. The art market is a complicated, and it's a very high finance market. It's a way that people who have huge fortunes, some of them appreciate art, some don't, frankly, right? But they're a way that people have huge fortunes can store their fortunes, can move their fortunes, can make their fortunes be inherited in ways that can sometimes get around tax laws. All of those things enter into art valuation in ways that are incredibly complicated. And I think that the thought is that folks who are engaging in NFTs, I think the thought is that it's going to be a similar kind of thing. I think a lot of them are less interested in the art than the value they think that is being stored in them. But there's been a long time to sort of settle out what an art market looks like. I think one of the things we're seeing that's wild about NFTs is it's like, it's what, a year and a half old phenomenon at this point, and so it's kind of wild.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, especially considering, right, that you don't own the intellectual property behind the NFT. I am wondering, I've heard that, this is kind of, an initial kind of like entrance into the idea of NFTs, and that there are future prospects and ideas where this kind of technology could be used in ways that go beyond art. Like, what do you think some of those ways that companies or charities or individuals might use NFTs in the future in creative ways that they're not being used now?
So I think there's definitely a possibility of marketing things as digital art. Like, for example, right now a company has shares, right? And those shares essentially indicate who owns the company, right? There are shareholders, board of directors and things like that. But now companies can also create NFTs, for example, of their logo, for example, right? They have a car design, right? What does a car actually look like, right? For example, a Tesla, what does it look like, right? That image, they can make it an NFT, right? So there will be definitely more ways of making money, and as excuse me, as Ammon just pointed out, right, a lot of things are out in the open, right? There might be certain emotional value to certain people. They might be attached to certain types of music, certain type of videos. Like, for example, one NFL moment was sold for like 200,000, right? So maybe one person has very emotional attachment to that particular moment, right? In that particular game. Similarly, someone has emotional attachment to some other video, or some cat gif or something like that, right? So those kind of things will also come into the picture in the longer run. And as you pointed out, right, the art market is a really complicated market, right? A lot of time people might not be interested just in the art, but just for bragging rights, right? I own a Monet, right? I own a Mona Lisa painting, something like that, right? So those kind of opportunities can definitely be utilized by companies and charities and things like that.
And I mean, kind of saying you're owning an NFL moment, for example. I mean, that's a moment that anyone could probably go find on YouTube or anything like that. And I don't know, that feels a little different than owning a piece of art, for example. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think this phenomenon of NFTs tells us about the idea of ownership in a digital age?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think part of the answer is that we're still trying to figure out how to answer that. You know, when I first got attracted to internet and digital art, like way back in the like 90s when I was a teenager, one of the things that was wildly open, and there was sort of this ethos that we're going to be able to share things, right? And I think we've seen that side of it very clearly. I think now people are wondering, how do we make sure that people who are creating intellectual property are paid for it, right, and are paid fairly? So, you know, we know that streaming platforms aren't great for musicians. Is NFTs the answer? To be perfectly honest, I'm pretty skeptical, right? That is to say, I don't think it's going to be a great way to to pay artists fairly, right? Will be used for other things. I think, you know, yeah, as Ahmed is pointing out, I think that, you know, anything that's useful to have a wide ledger for, it could be used for. I think the question is at what point is that going to be, is it overkill? And I think that we have the answer yet.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of space for these to run, and I feel like we're just kind of getting started on this conversation. I think we could do another couple episodes about this. There's so much out there. But that is all the time that we have for today. I want to thank you both so much for being here, and we will see you next time on Rocket Talk.
Thank you.